For most of human history, when we looked at the ocean, we saw a barrier, right? A massive, kind of terrifying wall of water that kept people and continents apart. But what if we've got that all wrong? What if the oceans were never really barriers at all? What if they were actually the superhighways that built our entire world?
So this is the big idea we're diving into. It's this fantastic metaphor that really just reframes everything. The ocean isn't just a big puddle. It's the secret engine that's been humming along in the background, powering exploration, driving trade, and pushing human civilization across the entire globe.
And that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? How did we humans go from being terrified of that endless blue horizon to completely mastering it? It's this incredible story of courage, of curiosity, and some serious ingenuity. And it all starts way, way before any tech we'd recognize today.
All right, so our story kicks off with the very first sailors. And these weren't just sailors, they were people with an almost unbelievable skill, the ability to read the natural world around them like it was a perfectly detailed map.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. You're out there with no compass, no satellite, no GPS, nothing but your own senses, and this deep, profound connection to your environment. It really was an art form. And, well, some cultures became absolute masters of it.
And when you talk about masters, you have to talk about the Polynesians. I mean, these guys were the absolute goats of ancient navigation. They crossed the impossibly huge Pacific Ocean, finding these tiny, remote islands. And get this, they weren't just looking at the stars. They could feel subtle shifts in wave patterns. They understood how ocean swells would bounce off of distant, unseen land. They were literally reading the texture of the ocean's surface to find their way. It's a mind-blowing feat of human skill.
And hey, it wasn't just the Polynesians. Over in the Mediterranean, you had the Phoenicians. They became the region's first big-time maritime traders, and their secret weapon? The North Star, their constant, reliable guide on those pitch-black nights. And then, way up north, you've got the Vikings. In those amazing longships, they crossed the freezing, brutal Atlantic, and they landed in North America a full 500 years before Columbus even thought about setting sail.
So look at this contrast right here. Where we have GPS, they had the stars. Instead of these massive engines, they had this unbelievably deep knowledge of currents and wind. This wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was a deep conversation they were having with nature itself.
For thousands of years, that's how it was. This incredible natural skill passed down from one generation to the next. But then a few key pieces of technology came along. And these didn't just help us navigate, they completely unlocked the world's oceans for all of humanity.
Okay, so here are the game changers. You've got the magnetic compass. Revolutionary, right? Suddenly you know your direction even when it's cloudy or you're in a storm. You combine that with stronger, more advanced ships that can handle seriously rough seas, plus a growing scientific understanding of global wind patterns, and all of a sudden, the impossible becomes possible. The ocean wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a doorway.
And man, was that doorway kicked wide open. And it happened fast. In 1492, boom. Columbus crosses the Atlantic. Just 6 years later, Vasco da Gama sails all the way around Africa to get to India, totally changing the game for global trade. And then in 1519, Magellan's expedition sets off to do what no one had ever done, sail all the way around the world, proving once and for all what our planet actually looked like.
So these voyages, they did way more than just redraw some maps. They literally rewired the entire planet. They kicked off this massive world-altering exchange of goods, animals, plants, ideas, and, well, pretty much everything else.
We often call this the Columbian Exchange, and it was a two-way street with some really profound consequences. You can see here, from the Americas, the world got foods that are now staples everywhere. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and yeah, the cacao that gives us chocolate. But then, coming the other way, from Europe, Asia, and Africa, you had animals like horses that totally transformed life in the Americas, and crops like wheat. But there was a dark side too. They also brought devastating diseases like smallpox and measles, which had an absolutely catastrophic effect on native populations who had zero immunity.
So, the bottom line is this. This was about so much more than just swapping some food around. This exchange fundamentally and permanently reshaped societies on every single continent. The world that we live in today, what we eat, how we live, is a direct result of these connections that were first forged by sea.
And you know what comes with all these new global connections, right? Power. Empires like England, Spain, Portugal, and the Ottoman Empire, they all figured it out pretty quick.
If you want to control the world, you first have to control its waters. And that kicked off a centuries-long race for naval dominance, building these huge colonial empires that stretched across the entire globe.
For hundreds of years, it all boiled down to this one simple, brutal equation. Naval power equals world power. The logic was inescapable. If you had the strongest navy, you had the most powerful empire on Earth, period. The oceans became the chessboard where all the global power struggles played out.
So where's all the evidence of this long and, let's be honest, often turbulent history? Well, it's not all in museums and history books. So much of it is still out there, hidden, perfectly preserved in the cold, dark depths of the ocean.
Just look at that number. Over 3,000 known shipwrecks in the Atlantic alone. And that's just the ones we've found. Every single one of those wrecks is a time capsule, a frozen moment in history that tells its own story of trade, exploration, migration, or war.
So you start to realize the deep sea isn't just a massive ecosystem, it's a vast library of our collective past. It holds everything from ancient Roman trading ships to sunken pirate galleons to the incredible warships of the world wars. All of them just sitting there, waiting for their stories to be told.
And that brings us right up to the present day, because the ocean's role as our planet's great connector, it hasn't diminished one bit. In fact, you could argue it's more critical than ever. We think our world is connected by satellites, right? Well, the truth is, the internet you're probably using to watch this is flowing through thousands of miles of submarine cables on the seafloor. Over 90% of everything you own, from your phone to your clothes, still travels by ship. The ocean is still our most vital and most invisible highway.
So let's end on this one last big thought. Just try to imagine a world where those first courageous mariners never set sail. What would our world look like? How different would our food be, our cultures, our languages, our entire understanding of this planet? It's a pretty powerful question, and it really reminds us that the history of humanity is, in so many ways, the history of the ocean itself.